Come off the porch. Right now.
Why? What's the reason?
I said step down. Don't stand there arguing with me.
I'm not arguing. I'm asking
you don't
what I
get
did.
to question me. Step off the porch. Hands behind your back now. Stop resisting.
I'm not resisting.
Keep your hands where we can see them.
This officer thought he was about to pull a suspicious guy into a quick detention and move on with his shift, but he didn't realize he was walking into a situation that would end up on thousands of screens by sunrise. The man on the porch, Andre Whitfield, wasn't running from anything. He wasn't in a car. He was smoking on his own front porch in Dayton around 3 a.m., and the only thing he kept doing wrong was refusing to leave his property without being told what he'd actually done. Once the officers put hands on him, it stopped being a simple check and turned into a public lesson about how fast authority can overstep when nobody thinks there's a camera watching. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, city and state, or your country if you're outside the U.S. And if you keep up with stories where footage and facts expose abuse of power, hit like and subscribe, because this is exactly how accountability starts. Someone records what officials later try to rewrite. Now back to how it started. Dayton was quiet at that hour. Andre was outside because he couldn't sleep and wanted to smoke. Nothing dramatic. Porch light on, street empty. The kind of moment most people forget 5 minutes later. A patrol car came through the neighborhood with headlights sweeping across yards and driveways. Earlier, the officers said they'd noticed a car that looked like it was trying to avoid them. That claim was the entire foundation for what happened next. No reported crime tied to Andre, no call from a neighbor, no description that matched him. They followed the car anyway, watched it turn through side streets, and then traced it to Andre's address. Here's where the logic broke. Even if the car did end up near his home, Andre wasn't inside it. He wasn't walking up a driveway with keys. He was standing on his porch, smoking, and watching police cars pull up like they already decided he was connected. The officers came up and told him to come off the porch. Andre didn't yell back. He didn't threaten anybody. He asked why they were ordering him around and what he'd done. He also pointed out the obvious. He was on his own property. Instead of giving him a clear reason, they kept pushing the same demand. Andre stayed put because, from his point of view, stepping off the porch meant agreeing that they had a lawful reason to control him. He wasn't trying to win a debate. He was trying to avoid getting dragged into a situation where the rules suddenly change, and he becomes the problem just for asking questions. The longer Andre refused to move, the more the officers' tone shifted. Their patience wasn't running out because he was dangerous. It was running out because he wasn't making it easy. They wanted him in the open, away from his front door, and they wanted it fast. Andre kept it consistent. He asked what he was being stopped for and why they were treating him like a suspect. The officers didn't offer anything specific that matched their level of aggression. No clear accusation. No explanation tying him to the car beyond "it came here," as if an address automatically turns into guilt. Then one officer stepped closer and reached for him. Andre pulled back, not like he was trying to fight, but like anyone would when a stranger reaches for them on their own porch. That moment became the excuse. The officers grabbed him, forced his arms, and turned a verbal confrontation into a physical arrest. While they did it, Andre kept repeating the same point. He was on his property, and he hadn't been told what crime he committed. The officers kept moving him anyway, controlling his body, because they couldn't control the conversation. What they didn't account for was the porch camera. A Ring doorbell had the whole exchange. It didn't capture a suspect refusing lawful orders, the way police statements sometimes frame these incidents. It captured a man standing in place, smoking, asking for a reason, and getting grabbed because he didn't comply with a demand that never came with a clear legal basis. Later, body camera footage filled in the details from the officer's side, and it didn't rescue the story the way departments hope it will. Different angle, same core issue. The escalation happened before any solid explanation did. Andre ended up in cuffs, still asking what he'd done. The officers acted like they'd handled a normal stop and kept it moving. Andre didn't have the luxury of forgetting it because he knew something important. Once the footage got out, this wouldn't stay a private argument on a porch. It would become a public question for the department. Why were officers treating a man on his own property like a suspect with no crime to point to? That's where the real fight started. Andre didn't get hauled off his porch with some clear explanation waiting on the other end. The reasoning stayed messy even after the cuffs clicked. Officers kept leaning on the same vague idea. A car looked like it was avoiding them. It ended up near his address, and therefore Andre needed to do whatever they said the moment they said it. That logic sounds tough in a report. It doesn't hold up in real life, because Andre still wasn't the driver of that car. He still wasn't caught doing anything illegal, and the officers still couldn't point to a specific crime that justified grabbing a man off his own porch for refusing to step into their control zone. By the time Andre got to the station, the tone shifted the way it always does after an arrest that's more force than facts. The officers weren't hyped anymore. Now they had to explain it. And explanations get real careful when there's video. Andre's side stayed consistent. He told them he'd been on his porch smoking, and they tried to order him off it without saying what he'd done. He kept asking what he was being detained for. He kept getting pressure instead of an answer. Then the quiet cleanup phase started. This is where a lot of cases die in silence. A person gets arrested, spends hours stressed out, gets released, and the department counts on exhaustion to do the rest. People have jobs, people have families. People don't want to spend months fighting over something that already happened. Andre didn't just let it fade. Part of that was pride. Most of it was reality. He knew how it looked. A black man in handcuffs at 3 a.m. is easy for strangers to judge if they don't see the beginning. He needed the beginning, the whole beginning, so the ring footage mattered immediately. That camera didn't take sides. It just captured what happened on the porch. The demands, the refusal, the grab, the escalation. Andre and the people close to him pushed to get everything. Ring footage, body cam reports, names, times. And then came the predictable move from the other side. Early messaging. At first, the story got framed like the officers had reasonable suspicion. Like Andre caused his own arrest by not cooperating. Like stepping off his porch was a normal request, and not a major shift in control. That framing works when the public only hears one voice. It collapses when video shows the timeline. Because on video, reasonable suspicion has to actually exist. You can't just say it and hope nobody asks what it was. Once the ring clip started circulating, the reaction wasn't complicated. People watched a man stand on his porch and ask what he did, and they watched officers decide the question itself was the problem. That's what hit people. Not just the arrest, the attitude behind it. The local conversation turned into a bigger one fast. Folks weren't debating whether Andre was polite enough. They were asking why police thought they could pull someone off private property on a hunch that didn't even connect to him. Then the body camera footage came into the picture. Bodycam didn't rescue the officers the way it sometimes does when a clip is missing context. It added context that made it worse. It showed the same thing from the inside. Officers talking themselves into escalation, repeating orders without building a legal reason, treating the porch like it was a crime scene just because they wanted it to be. Once both videos were out there, the case stopped being a neighborhood incident and turned into a public test for the department. People wanted to know what the policies were, what officers were allowed to do on private property, and why he didn't comply was being treated like a crime when Andre was asking a basic question any innocent person would ask. And behind the scenes, the department had a new problem. The footage didn't match the clean version of the story. Internal reviews don't start because departments suddenly get a conscience. They start because the receipts are too clear to ignore. If the public can see the gaps, officials have to either admit it or double down and look dishonest. Andre's situation got re-examined. The key fact landed hard. He hadn't done anything wrong. No illegal driving, no matching suspect description, no evidence tying him to that car beyond it came to this area. No crime on the porch. Just a refusal to step off property when officers couldn't explain why they were there. Once that conclusion took shape, everything the officers did after the initial approach looked worse. The grab, the force, the arrest. It all became an answer to a question nobody liked hearing. What did I do? Public backlash kept building. Community voices got louder. Media coverage followed because the story had everything that makes people angry. A man at home, a vague pretext, and a camera showing the gap between lawful policing and because I can. At that point, discipline stopped being optional. The department had to respond in a way that looked real, not symbolic. And that's where the pressure started turning into consequences. Once the video spread, the department lost control of the story. That's what changed everything. Internal memos and careful wording don't compete with clear footage, especially when the footage shows a simple pattern. Officers treated suspicion like proof and treated a man's porch like their workspace. Public pressure didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere at once. Neighbors shared it. Local pages reposted it. People who didn't even know Andre started asking the same question he asked on the porch. What was the crime? And when the department couldn't answer that with something specific, the focus shifted to the next question. Why did the officers escalate so fast? Early on, officials tried to stand behind the usual language. They leaned on officer safety, ongoing investigation, and non-compliance. That framing works when the public doesn't see the beginning. In this case, the beginning was the whole story. The Ring video showed Andre in place, smoking and asking for a reason. The Bodycam showed the officers from their own perspective, still struggling to justify why they needed him off the porch in the first place. Together, those videos boxed the department in. If they defended the arrest, they'd be defending the idea that an officer can grab you on your property simply because you don't step where they want. That's a losing argument in a city full of homeowners and renters who understand one thing perfectly. A porch is still part of home. So the review process turned from checking a complaint into damage control with deadlines. Supervisors had to read the reports. They had to compare them to video. They had to explain the gap between what was claimed and what was visible. And then the core finding hit, quietly at first, and then publicly. Andre Whitfield had done nothing wrong. That one sentence changed the entire case from messy but justified to unlawful and avoidable. If there's no underlying offense, the chain snaps. The stop looks shaky. The orders look pointless. The force looks excessive. The arrest looks like retaliation for not being obedient enough. That's what the footage made impossible to deny. Discipline started as the department's attempt to calm the outrage. The problem was, the outrage wasn't about tone. It was about conduct. People weren't asking for an apology. They were asking whether the officers would face real consequences for grabbing a man off his own porch over a hunch that didn't even point to him. The department moved through the steps fast. Administrative review, policy checks, internal interviews, supervisors trying to figure out who approved what and why. Nobody slowed it down. Once the scrutiny locked in, the officers involved couldn't hide behind split-second decisions because nothing about that porch encounter was split-second. They had time. They chose escalation anyway. Eventually, the outcome landed where the footage had been pointing the whole time. The officers involved got fired. That mattered because it sent a message the public almost never gets to see in these cases. The video didn't just create a debate, it created consequences. The job losses didn't undo the arrest, but they did confirm something important. Andre wasn't confused about his rights, and he wasn't lucky to be proven innocent later. He was right in the moment. Andre's name became attached to a bigger warning. People used the case to talk about property lines and policing, but also something more basic. How quickly some officers treat everyday behavior as suspicious when the person doesn't look like someone they're used to respecting. A man smoking on his porch became connected to a car the police chose to follow. That's not an investigation. That's assumption with a badge. The longer-term impact didn't stay stuck on those two officers either. Departments don't like getting embarrassed on video. Policies get re-emphasized. Training gets scheduled. Supervisors start reminding people what they're allowed to order and what they're not. The phrase private property suddenly shows up in briefings like it's a new concept. Even when institutions move for selfish reasons, the result can still protect the public. Andre didn't walk away from it like some movie hero. Real life doesn't work like that. He walked away knowing he'd been targeted for nothing, handled roughly on his own porch, and then forced to fight for the truth after the fact. He also walked away knowing the footage mattered, and not just for him. It set a boundary in public view. Here's the moral, and it is not complicated. When authorities can't explain what you did, they'll try to make the problem your attitude. They'll try to turn questions into disrespect. They'll try to turn standing still into obstruction. That's why recording matters. That's why oversight matters. Not because cameras make people perfect, but because cameras make people accountable. Now, I want to ask you, if you were Andre, standing on your own porch with police telling you to step off without giving a reason, what would you do? Would you comply immediately just to avoid the risk? Or would you hold your ground and demand the legal basis? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've been in something like this, traffic stop, porch encounter, we just need to talk that turns into force. Share what happened. Someone reading might need that perspective. And if you want more story times like this, where the footage exposes the truth and the power games don't survive daylight, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more.
Turn the music down right now. I'm not asking
There's
again.
no music playing in this house.
Don't do that. We got a complaint. I can cite you right now.
Then you're at the wrong address.
You don't get to tell me how to do my job.
Verify it before you threaten me.
I can come in and make sure the disturbance stops.
No, you cannot.
Officer Tyler McKenna walked up to a quiet house believing he was about to handle a simple late-night noise complaint. He treated it like a guaranteed win. Show up, pressure the homeowner, leave with compliance. He didn't know he was at the wrong address, and he definitely didn't know the man inside, Andre Whitaker, ran internal affairs for the same county. That combination mattered because McKenna didn't just arrive mistaken. He arrived aggressive. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. City, state, or country. And if you like stories where someone stays calm, documents everything, and forces accountability the right way, hit like and subscribe. These situations only change when people refuse to let them get brushed off. Now, rewind. It was a late night in May 2023 in a suburban county neighborhood with two streets that sounded almost identical, Oak Ridge Lane and Oak Ridge Drive. Dispatch received a noise complaint tied to 847 Oak Ridge Drive. The call got routed wrong, and McKenna was sent to 847 Oak Ridge Lane instead. One wrong word, one wrong house. Andre Whitaker was at home. No party, no music, no TV blasting. Nothing that matched the complaint. He was doing what most people do at that hour, trying to finish the day and get some sleep. McKenna pulled up already convinced he had a problem house. He didn't take time to verify the street name against the complaint details. He didn't slow down to confirm he was actually where the caller reported the noise. He walked straight to the door with the mindset that the person inside was about to get corrected. Whitaker answered calmly. He didn't act confused, because the situation wasn't confusing. It was obvious the officer had the wrong place. McKenna immediately brought up loud music and spoke as if it had already been confirmed. Whitaker responded the simplest way possible. Nothing was playing and the house was quiet. McKenna didn't accept that answer. He treated it like an excuse. Whitaker corrected him again and explained the address issue. He told McKenna he was on Oak Ridge Lane and the complaint address was Oak Ridge Drive. He asked him to double-check. That's where the interaction could have ended with a quick radio confirmation and an apology. McKenna chose the opposite. Instead of verifying, he escalated. He talked about writing a citation. He talked about arrest. He hinted he could come inside and make sure the noise stopped. None of that made sense because there was no noise to stop, and there was no legal basis for threatening entry when the officer hadn't confirmed the complaint location or even verified the situation. Whitaker stayed composed and focused on facts. He didn't argue about respect. He didn't throw his title around. He kept pointing back to what mattered: the wrong address, the lack of music, and the need to verify before making threats. McKenna's approach showed a bigger issue. He was acting like his authority replaced evidence. When Whitaker didn't get intimidated, McKenna pushed harder, like the goal wasn't solving a complaint, but forcing submission. Another detail made the moment worse. McKenna's body camera wasn't activated. Whitaker noticed. He'd spent his career reviewing incidents where body cameras accidentally weren't on during the exact moments accountability mattered. He didn't say it dramatically. He registered it the way an investigator does, as a problem that would matter later. The pressure continued for several minutes. McKenna kept insisting the complaint was valid. Whitaker kept insisting the facts didn't match. The conversation stayed controlled on Whitaker's side, but the threat was still real because officers don't need to be right to make your night dangerous. They only need to decide they're going to. The change came when McKenna finally realized who he was dealing with. It wasn't some magic flip. It was recognition. Something connected: the name, the tone, the confidence, the way Whitaker kept returning to policy and verification. Once McKenna understood Whitaker wasn't just any homeowner, the aggression dropped. The threats stopped. The posture softened. He ended the encounter and left without a citation, without an arrest, and without doing the one thing he should have done from the beginning: verify he was even at the correct address. Whitaker didn't let the situation fade into nothing happened. He treated it like a serious incident because it was one. He documented it right away while details were fresh: the address mix-up, the threats, the refusal to verify, and the body camera failure. He also made a decision before the night even fully passed. He was going to file a formal complaint. By morning, Whitaker wasn't debating whether it was worth it. He'd seen too many incidents die in the space between anger and action. He moved like someone who understood timelines, documentation, and how quickly a bad encounter gets rewritten once people start protecting themselves. He started with a clean account of what happened: time of contact, wrong street name, the claim of loud music that didn't exist, the threats to cite, arrest, and enter, the fact that the body camera wasn't activated. He kept it factual because he knew emotional wording gives people excuses to dismiss it. Then he took the next step and filed a formal complaint through the department's process. No side conversations. No handle this quietly request. He wanted it logged the way policy required, because a logged complaint can be audited later. A casual complaint can disappear. The first response he got was exactly what you'd expect from a system that's used to minimizing these moments. Someone tried to frame it as a simple mix-up. Wrong address happens, they said. Late nights are stressful, they implied. Nothing really occurred since nobody got arrested. That argument is how patterns survive. If the only thing that counts is the worst-case outcome, then everything short of tragedy gets treated like background noise. Whitaker didn't argue. He tightened the record. He requested the dispatch information tied to the call. He requested the CAD entry. He requested the event number. He wanted to see what address dispatch actually had, what was typed, what was read over the radio, and what McKenna acknowledged. That's where truth starts separating from excuses. He also made sure the body camera issue was central, not a footnote. Officers don't get to choose when accountability applies. If a call is serious enough to threaten arrest and entry, it's serious enough for a camera. Simple as that. A few days later, the conversation shifted inside the building. The word got around that the homeowner wasn't just some guy. People started realizing Whitaker could read a report and immediately spot what was missing. He could compare the narrative to policy in real time. He could ask for things most civilians don't even know exist. That changed how careful everyone suddenly wanted to be. Whitaker didn't lean on his title in public. He didn't need to. The system already knew what it meant. He also did something strategic. He contacted a civil rights attorney before the department could close ranks and declare the matter resolved. The attorney didn't treat it like a dramatic headline. They treated it like a case file. They asked the same questions a good investigator would ask, just with a legal lens. They focused on 4 points. McKenna went to the wrong address and didn't verify it. He claimed loud music with no objective confirmation. He escalated to threats of arrest and entry without a factual basis. He failed to activate his body camera. Those aren't just bad judgment calls, those are policy problems. Legal problems, too, depending on what the evidence shows. The attorney sent preservation requests right away. That meant dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS data, any neighbor call details, and anything else tied to that incident had to be retained. No accidental deletion later. No convenient gaps. Inside the department, the internal investigation started moving. Interviews got scheduled. Supervisors were asked what they reviewed that night and what they approved. McKenna was asked to explain why he didn't verify the street. He was asked why he escalated. He was asked why his camera wasn't on. That last question hit hard because it wasn't his first time getting asked it. As investigators dug, they didn't just look at this one call. They started looking sideways at his history. Prior complaints, prior write-ups, prior informal concerns that never became anything official. That's where departments either get honest or get exposed. Whitaker's complaint opened a door that had been kept shut for a long time. Records showed multiple complaints about McKenna being confrontational without cause. Stops that escalated fast. Residents describing the same pattern, heavy confidence, light verification. Supervisors knowing he was a problem, but choosing the easy route. Because disciplining an aggressive officer creates paperwork and conflict, and ignoring it feels simpler until it explodes. This time, it didn't stay simple. The attorney made it clear Whitaker had 2 tracks running at once: internal accountability and civil liability. One didn't replace the other. If the department tried to bury it, the lawsuit would drag it into daylight. McKenna's defense started forming fast. He leaned on the usual claims. He said he acted on a complaint. He said he believed he was at the right address. He said the homeowner's attitude concerned him. He suggested the situation required firmness. It wasn't enough because the record was building around him. Dispatch logs would show the address. GPS would show where he went. Audio would show what he was told. The absence of Bodycam would sit there like a missing page from a book, right at the part that mattered. And Whitaker, of all people, knew how to keep pressure on the process without letting it turn into a personal feud. By the end of the first couple of weeks, the department couldn't treat it as miscommunication anymore. Too many pieces were being requested. Too many people were being interviewed. Too much of McKenna's history started matching the same shape. The county also noticed something else. If this became public, it wouldn't just be about one officer at one door. It would be about why repeated complaints were ignored until the wrong officer picked the wrong address and threatened the wrong homeowner. The internal investigation didn't start with a grand reveal. It started with routine checks that should have happened on night 1. Investigators pulled the dispatch package. They listened to the call notes. They checked what address got entered and what address got transmitted. They matched it to the GPS data from McKenna's unit. They compared that to the complaint address. The conclusion was clean. McKenna went to 847 Oak Ridge Lane, while the complaint was for 847 Oak Ridge Drive. The mix-up didn't excuse what happened next because policy still required verification before escalation. Then came the part that made supervisors uncomfortable. McKenna's report didn't match reality. He wrote it like he had probable cause to act. He leaned on the idea that a complaint existed, so enforcement was justified. The problem was that a complaint isn't proof, and his own steps showed he didn't even confirm he was at the right location. Investigators also checked body camera logs. McKenna's camera wasn't activated during the interaction. There was no valid reason documented, no equipment failure reported, no supervisor note, nothing. That's a major policy violation on its own, but it also raised an obvious question. Why was he comfortable threatening arrest and entry while leaving the most important part of the encounter unrecorded? The investigators interviewed Whitaker. They interviewed McKenna. They interviewed the dispatch operator. They interviewed the supervising sergeant assigned that shift. They also spoke to neighbors nearby, not to chase gossip, but to confirm the simplest fact in this entire situation. There was no loud music at Whitaker's house. No one credible could back up McKenna's claim. The street wasn't describing a disturbance. The complaint didn't even belong to that address. The case was turning into a textbook example of what happens when an officer treats authority like a shortcut. At this point, the department had a choice. They could treat the incident like one bad call and hand out a light reprimand, or they could do what they rarely do, open the closet and look for what else was inside. They looked. McKenna had a history, not one dramatic incident that forced a headline. Something more common and honestly more dangerous in the long run. Repeated complaints that sounded similar and went nowhere. Residents had reported him being aggressive without clear cause. People described him escalating conversations quickly and using threats to control situations that didn't require force. Some complaints mentioned stops and contacts where he refused to explain the legal basis for what he was doing. Others mentioned intimidation, then no meaningful follow-up from the department. That pattern mattered because it explained why McKenna felt comfortable acting the way he did at Whitaker's door. He didn't act like someone afraid of consequences. He acted like someone used to them not existing. Supervisors got pulled into it next. Investigators asked what they knew about earlier complaints. They asked why nothing had changed. They asked what corrective actions had been taken. The answers weren't great. A lot of it came down to the usual mix. Complaints labeled unfounded without serious review, informal counseling that never got tracked, and leadership treating community reports like noise instead of warning signals. Nobody wanted the extra work. Nobody wanted the conflict. Everyone wanted the problem to stay quiet. Whitaker's complaint didn't let it stay quiet. Meanwhile, the civil side started tightening too. Whitaker's attorney filed suit against McKenna and the county. It wasn't just about feelings or embarrassment. It centered on unlawful threats, misuse of authority, failure to follow policy, and the county's role in allowing a pattern to continue. The county's legal team tried the standard containment approach. They floated the idea that McKenna made a reasonable mistake. They suggested the interaction was brief. They implied no harm occurred since Whitaker wasn't arrested. Whitaker's response stayed consistent. The harm was the threat itself, delivered without facts, at the wrong address, with no camera, from an officer with a record that leadership kept ignoring. Then the investigation hit the part that usually triggers panic meetings. McKenna's conduct wasn't just unprofessional. Investigators found multiple policy violations. That combination pushed it out of the training issue category. It moved into discipline that couldn't be explained away. The county also had a reputational problem now. Internal affairs was involved. The complainant was the head of it, and the facts were straightforward. If they tried to bury it and it leaked later, it would look like the department only cared because the target had status. They were right to worry because people inside the department started talking, not the helpful kind of talking. the nervous kind. Some officers complained privately that Whitaker was making it a big deal. Others were more honest. They didn't like McKenna. They'd seen him do this kind of thing, and they knew leadership let it slide. The internal investigation wrapped with findings that didn't leave room for creative interpretation. McKenna violated policy repeatedly during a single, simple call. That result triggered the next phase. Administrative discipline was coming. The lawsuit was moving forward. The district attorney's office had enough to evaluate whether criminal charges applied, especially tied to misconduct and unlawful actions under color of authority. McKenna wasn't just facing a write-up anymore. He was facing consequences that could end his career. By the time the internal investigation finished, the county couldn't pretend this was a communication issue. Too many facts lined up the same way. Wrong address. No verification. Threats that didn't match the situation. Body camera not activated. A report that tried to justify the escalation after the fact. That's how it moved from an internal problem to a legal one. The district attorney's office reviewed the investigation file and the supporting records. They didn't need a complicated theory. The conduct was straightforward. McKenna used police authority to threaten enforcement actions without confirming he was even at the correct location, and he did it off camera when policy required recording. That isn't a small mistake. It's misuse of power. Criminal charges followed. McKenna tried to fight it like most officers do when the system finally turns toward them. He framed it as a stressful night. He leaned on the idea that officers need discretion. He pushed the narrative that he was responding to a community complaint and had to act quickly. The prosecution didn't chase emotions. They stayed on sequence and proof. They showed the complaint address and the address McKenna actually went to. They showed that he had multiple chances to verify and chose escalation instead. They highlighted the body camera failure and the lack of any valid explanation for it. They showed the policy requirements he violated and how those rules exist to prevent exactly this kind of conduct. He got convicted. That conviction did what internal discipline alone often fails to do. It removed the argument that this was just department politics. A court treated it as misconduct, not an internal disagreement. After conviction, his peace officer's certification didn't survive. He permanently lost it. No quiet lateral move to another agency. No reset in a neighboring county. The credentials were gone, and so was the career that depended on them. While the criminal case unfolded, Whitaker's civil case kept moving on its own track. The county knew what discovery would reveal if they dragged it out. The ignored complaints, the pattern, and the way leadership let it continue. They also knew what it would look like in public if they fought hard against the head of internal affairs after the facts were confirmed. A long trial wasn't going to help them. They settled. $300,000 to Whitaker. That number wasn't just compensation. It was the county paying for the gap between what policy said and what leadership allowed. McKenna created the incident, but the county created the environment where he believed he could operate like that. The settlement also came with pressure that money alone couldn't solve. The county had to adopt reforms that directly targeted the failures exposed by this call. Inside the department, the cultural effect was immediate. Officers who relied on intimidation started watching their steps. Supervisors realized ignoring complaints could come back on them with receipts. Internal affairs gained leverage to demand real follow-through because Whitaker's case showed what happens when leadership tries to smooth things over instead of fixing it. Whitaker didn't treat the outcome like a victory lap. He treated it like proof of concept. Calm beats chaos. Documentation beats denial. Process beats power trips. He handled the encounter the way people wish they could when they're put on the spot. He stayed steady, he kept it factual, and he made sure the system had something it couldn't dismiss. This story stuck because it wasn't about a dramatic rescue or a lucky break. It was about a common situation turning dangerous for no reason, and a person refusing to let it get normalized. If you're watching this and thinking about what you would have done, that's the point. Would you have argued? Would you have backed down just to end it? Would you have remembered the details the next day? Most people don't get taught how to protect themselves in these moments. Whitaker did 3 things that changed everything. He didn't escalate emotionally, he documented immediately, and he pushed it through the right channels with legal backup when the system started to minimize it. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do if an officer showed up at the wrong address and started threatening arrest anyway? Would you know what to say? Would you know what to document? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who needs reminders that accountability is real when you build the record. And if you want more stories like this, realistic, modern, and focused on how people actually win against abuse of authority, subscribe.
Both of you IDs, right now.
Officer, what's the legal reason for the demand?
I got a suspicious persons call, and you look suspicious.
We're eating breakfast. Who said we were doing anything wrong?
You don't need details. I said show ID.
No, we're asking you to explain.
Keep talking like that, and I can arrest both of you for obstruction.
Officer Tyler Bennett walked into Harper's Diner thinking he was about to run the easiest intimidation stop of his week. A vague call. 2 black men. A room full of people who wouldn't want trouble. He moved straight to their booth, demanded identification, and acted like refusing him was the same thing as committing a crime. What he didn't realize was that one of the men sitting there wasn't just another civilian. Judge Nathaniel Brooks held a federal bench and knew exactly what Bennett could and couldn't do. The moment Brooks started pressing him for legal basis, Bennett's whole approach became a mistake that couldn't be undone because a body camera was rolling and customers were already lifting their phones. Before we get into how this started, tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you like stories where power trips get exposed and people get held to the rules, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Harper's Diner was the kind of place that ran on routine, morning regulars, coffee refills that came before you asked. A few cops stopped in sometimes, not because anyone loved the police, but because small towns tended to treat uniforms like part of the scenery. That morning, Judge Nathaniel Brooks sat with Calvin Reed in a booth near the back. They weren't hiding. They weren't loud. They were eating breakfast and talking the way old friends talked. Low voices, relaxed posture, no attention-seeking. A call came over dispatch anyway. It wasn't tied to theft, violence, or any specific complaint about behavior. The report was vague enough to fit into a pattern that almost always meant the same thing. Someone saw 2 black men in a place they didn't expect and decided that discomfort counted as suspicion. Bennett arrived with that call in his head, and he entered the diner already committed to a conclusion. He didn't check in with staff. He didn't ask if anyone had caused an issue. He scanned the room once and locked onto Brooks and Calvin like the decision had been made before he opened the door. He walked up to their booth and demanded IDs. He didn't frame it as a request. He framed it as an order, like there was already a legal reason, and they were the ones stalling. Brooks didn't get dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He stayed seated, kept his hands visible, and asked Bennett what the legal basis was for the demand. The question sounded simple, but it landed hard, because it forced Bennett to explain what he hadn't bothered to establish. Bennett didn't answer the question cleanly. He leaned on the call. He treated the call itself like authority. He acted like the fact that someone had labeled them suspicious meant they now owed him compliance. Calvin watched Bennett closely. He had the look of someone who recognized the pattern and didn't want to give it fuel. His posture stayed controlled, but irritation sat right under the surface. Not panic, not fear. Frustration that this was happening in public over breakfast again. Bennett escalated quickly when he realized they weren't going to fold on the first command. He repeated the demand and started layering in pressure tactics. He suggested refusal would turn into a bigger problem. He hinted that they were making themselves look guilty. He added comments that weren't about safety or investigation and didn't belong in professional policing. He made it personal, and he made sure people nearby could hear it. That was the point. If he could embarrass them into compliance, he wouldn't need legal grounds. Brooks stayed calm and kept it procedural. He asked again what crime was being investigated and what specific facts supported a detention. He didn't talk like he was trying to win an argument. He talked like he was documenting a record in real time. Bennett responded by threatening arrest. He reached for the usual vague charges officers used when they wanted to punish someone for not submitting. He treated failure to identify like a universal rule, even though it didn't work that way. He talked about obstruction. He mentioned disorderly conduct, as if the act of sitting quietly and asking questions could become a disturbance just because he said so. Customers started paying attention. Forks slowed. Conversations dropped off. People didn't need legal training to recognize when an officer was pushing too hard with too little reason. Miguel Santos, the owner, noticed the shift and stepped out from behind the counter. He approached the booth with the calm urgency of someone trying to prevent his diner from turning into a scene. Miguel asked what was going on and why Bennett was demanding IDs from paying customers who were eating quietly. Bennett turned on him fast. He told Miguel to back off and implied that interfering would bring consequences. The tone carried a message that went beyond the moment. The badge outranked the business owner, and Bennett expected everyone to accept that. Miguel didn't take the bait. He didn't insult Bennett. He didn't get loud. He kept the focus on the facts. No one inside the diner had reported a crime. The men weren't causing a disturbance, and the officer didn't get to treat suspicion as a blank check. Bennett doubled down. He tried to control the room by controlling the narrative. He raised his voice slightly and used officer safety language as cover, even though Brooks and Calvin hadn't moved in a threatening way. He positioned himself like he wanted the camera angles, his body cam, the customers' phones, to show him in charge. That didn't work the way he expected, because the same cameras also captured what started this: a vague call, a targeted approach, and escalating threats without a clear legal foundation. More customers pulled out phones. Some recorded openly, others held their devices lower. Either way, Bennett was surrounded by witnesses who weren't relying on memory anymore. Brooks noticed. Calvin noticed. Miguel noticed too. The power balance shifted the moment multiple recordings started. Bennett tried to force the old balance back into place. He demanded IDs again. He talked about taking them outside. He hinted that if they didn't comply, he'd make the situation worse for them. Brooks didn't match his aggression. He stayed composed and stayed specific. He made it clear he wasn't refusing because he had something to hide. He was refusing because Bennett hadn't articulated a lawful reason. That calmness irritated Bennett more than anger would have. Anger gives an officer an excuse to claim a threat. Calm, precise questioning takes that excuse away and leaves only the officer's decisions. Bennett slipped and revealed what was actually driving him. He made statements that had nothing to do with a specific investigation and everything to do with whether Brooks and Calvin belonged there. The moment wasn't subtle. It was the kind of talk that showed bias without needing interpretation. Brooks didn't argue about feelings. He moved the situation towards accountability. He identified himself. He gave his name and his position as a federal judge in a straightforward way, without showmanship. He didn't wave it like a weapon. He stated it like a fact that Bennett needed to understand immediately. Bennett's demeanor changed on the spot. His voice softened. His posture adjusted. He tried to shrink the moment down into something harmless, like he'd been doing a normal check, and it had simply reached its end. That attempt didn't land, because the escalation had already happened, and it had already been captured. Brooks didn't let him rewrite it. He requested a supervisor. He made it clear he wanted the incident documented and the recordings preserved. He didn't threaten Bennett personally. He didn't grandstand. He kept it about process and law. Calvin stayed steady beside him. He didn't jump into a speech. He didn't antagonize. His restraint mattered because it denied Bennett the chaos he could have used as cover. Miguel stood his ground too. He didn't apologize for defending his customers, and he didn't accept being treated like a suspect in his own business. By the time Bennett tried to step away, he wasn't controlling the scene anymore. He was trapped inside his own footage, surrounded by witnesses who had watched him escalate from a baseless demand to threats and intimidation. That was how breakfast at Harper's Diner turned into the beginning of a case. Judge Brooks didn't let the diner incident fade into a "we'll look into it" promise. He moved fast because he knew how this usually went when people waited. Memories got fuzzy, footage got overwritten, and the official report became the only story anyone was expected to believe. He started by locking down every source of video. Miguel confirmed Harper's Diner had security cameras that covered the dining area and entrance, and he agreed to export the entire time window around Bennett's arrival. Brooks made sure Miguel kept an extra copy as well. No single point of failure. Calvin focused on witnesses. He didn't try to recruit a crowd. He identified the customers closest to the booth, got names and numbers, and asked who was willing to give a written statement. Several agreed on the spot, especially the ones who had already recorded on their phones. They understood that a video clip alone didn't cover everything. Tone, threats, and the way Bennett tried to pressure people into handing over IDs needed context. Brooks also submitted formal requests immediately. He requested the Bodycam footage, the dispatch audio for the original call, and any reports Bennett filed connected to the incident. He didn't do it as a casual ask. He did it through the proper channels, with the expectation that the department would preserve evidence and document its handling. While all that was happening, the public side kicked off without anyone needing to coordinate it. Customers posted clips from their phones. Those videos traveled because they were straightforward. An officer entered on a vague, suspicious call, singled out two black men eating breakfast, demanded IDs without explaining a specific crime, then escalated into threats when they asked basic legal questions. People didn't share it because it was dramatic. They shared it because it looked familiar. By midday, Harper's Diner had strangers calling and messaging. Local pages were reposting. A few larger accounts picked it up and framed it for what it was: profiling dressed up as policing. The judge reveal added fuel, but the initial minutes were what did the real damage to Bennett, because they showed his intent before he realized who he was dealing with. The department released a short statement saying it was reviewing the situation. No details, no admission. The usual holding pattern. Brooks didn't respond with a social media war. He kept it procedural. His complaint laid out a clean timeline. Bennett's initial demand, the lack of a clear legal basis, the threats of arrest, the hostility toward Miguel, and the shift in Bennett's demeanor once Brooks identified himself. Calvan's statement backed it up, from the perspective of the person sitting next to him, watching the escalation happen step by step. Miguel added his own complaint. He described the moment Bennett tried to intimidate him for speaking up as the owner. That mattered because it showed Bennett wasn't only targeting the men in the booth. He was also trying to silence anyone who interfered. Once Internal Affairs had those filings, they couldn't treat this like a simple misunderstanding between an officer and two diners. There were too many independent recordings, too many witnesses, and too clear a question at the center of it. What lawful reason did Bennett have to detain them and demand identification? The next stage was predictable. Bennett went on administrative leave. Leadership framed it as standard protocol, but everyone understood what it really meant. The city was trying to reduce the risk while they figured out whether they could defend him. That's when investigators pulled Bennett's record. Earlier complaints hadn't disappeared. They'd been filed, minimized, and closed without real consequences. The details varied, but the theme stayed consistent: racially biased stops, vague justifications, and a tendency to get aggressive when someone questioned him. Some complaints included people saying he threatened them with arrest for things that weren't crimes. Others described him demanding IDs in situations where there was no clear reason beyond, "I want to know who you are." The diner incident forced those older complaints into the light. When video shows the same tactics people have been reporting for years, the department loses the ability to call everyone confused or unreliable. Then the body cam footage surfaced publicly. It didn't help Bennett. It showed him walking in with a plan, not with questions. It captured his tone as he escalated from demand to threat. It also made one part impossible to explain away. Once he learned Brooks was a federal judge, he changed instantly. Softer voice, less bravado, a sudden push to end the encounter cleanly. That contrast told the real story. He wasn't just doing his job. He was doing what he thought he could get away with, until he realized the person in front of him had the power and credibility to make it stick. By the end of that week, the department's messaging shifted again. They stopped hinting at confusion. They started talking about policy adherence and community concerns. That language change was subtle, but it meant one thing. They knew Bennett was turning into a liability they couldn't carry. And Brooks and Calvin weren't backing off. They were preparing to take it past internal discipline and into civil court, where evidence matters more than excuses. Once the body cam footage circulated, the department stopped treating Bennett like a normal employee problem and started treating him like a lawsuit risk. You could see it in their behavior. Fewer casual statements, more lawyers in the room, more careful wording. Judge Brooks and Calvin Reed didn't let them drag it out. Their attorney sent a preservation notice to the city and the department, covering everything tied to Bennett and the diner call. Dispatch recordings, CAD notes, body cam metadata, radio traffic, patrol car GPS, prior complaint files, training records, supervisor reviews, discipline history, and any internal messages about the incident. That notice mattered because it cut off the most common escape route, claiming something wasn't saved. Miguel Santos added pressure from a different angle. He confirmed he would cooperate with any investigation and any civil case, and he gave a formal statement about being threatened in his own business. That expanded the story beyond two customers versus an officer. It turned into an officer tried to intimidate an entire room. Internal Affairs finished their review faster than usual, not because the system suddenly became efficient, but because the evidence left almost no space to argue. Bennett had demanded IDs without a clear legal basis. He escalated when questioned. He used arrest threats to force compliance. He directed the same intimidation toward Miguel when Miguel spoke up. The recordings also showed how Bennett's tone changed once he realized Brooks had institutional power. Then the deeper review of Bennett's history landed like a brick. Investigators didn't just see a few isolated complaints. They saw repetition across years, stops initiated for vague reasons, complaints describing similar language, patterns in who was targeted, multiple occasions where supervisors closed concerns with soft corrective action and no sustained finding. That became a second scandal on top of the diner incident. The department had warnings and chose not to treat them like warnings. At that point, the department had two options: defend Bennett publicly and hope the public got tired, or cut him loose and try to contain the damage. They chose containment. Bennett was terminated. The department framed it as a policy and conduct failure tied to the diner incident, but the public understood what it really was. The videos forced their hand. Bennett didn't go quietly. He tried to justify himself through informal channels, claiming he was responding to a call and doing what he thought was appropriate. That defense didn't hold up because the call itself had been vague and biased, and his actions didn't match a legitimate investigation. The more he tried to explain, the worse it sounded. Then the civil rights lawsuit hit. Brooks and Calvin filed claims alleging racial discrimination, unlawful detention, and retaliation threats connected to their refusal to comply with an unlawful demand. They also targeted the department and city for failures in training, supervision, and discipline, arguing the department had earlier warning signs and didn't act. Miguel's role strengthened the case. He wasn't the target of the suspicious call, yet Bennett still threatened him when he defended customers. That supported the argument that Bennett wasn't acting out of safety concerns. He was using the badge to control people who didn't submit. The city's legal team tried to steer the case toward quiet resolution. They pushed for behind-the-scenes negotiation, hoping to avoid depositions that would force supervisors to explain why Bennett's earlier complaints were handled the way they were. Brooks understood the leverage. He didn't need a loud public campaign. The record spoke for itself. Multiple recordings, a body cam angle, security footage, witnesses who weren't connected to him, dispatch audio showing how weak the original call was, complaint history establishing a pattern. That's the kind of package that makes a city nervous, because a jury doesn't need complicated legal theory to understand it. The city settled. They paid a significant amount rather than gamble on trial, especially with a federal judge as a plaintiff and a mountain of video evidence already in the public conversation. Settlements don't always equal justice, but they do signal one thing. The city didn't believe it could win cleanly. The settlement terms also pushed change. The department tightened rules around ID demands and consensual contacts, requiring officers to clearly document the legal basis for detentions and discouraging phishing for identification without articulable reasons. Bodycam review expanded, not just when something went viral, but through routine auditing so patterns could be caught earlier. Complaint intake procedures changed, so repeat allegations weren't dismissed as unrelated noise. Bias training became mandatory, with clearer discipline for violations instead of vague coaching. The department also faced community consequences that money couldn't fix quickly. People didn't forget the first few minutes of that diner footage. They remembered an officer walking in confident. He could treat two black men like suspects for existing in a booth. They remembered the threats. They remembered the tone shift the instant Brooks identified himself. That contrast damaged trust more than any single insult ever could, because it showed Bennett understood what he was doing and only got cautious when power sat across from him. For Brooks and Calvin, the outcome wasn't about feeling vindicated. They already knew what happened. It was about preventing the department from pretending it was a one-time mistake. The record forced the city to admit risk, forced the department to act, and warned other officers watching the fallout that this conduct could cost them their job. Miguel stayed open for business, but he didn't go back to pretending neutrality was safety. He made it clear Harper's Diner served everyone, and he backed that up with action when it mattered most. That's the lesson here. Power tries to win through speed and intimidation. Cam and documentation slow it down. Clear boundaries expose it. Cameras finish the job. If you were sitting in that booth, so what would you have done? Handed over the ID to end it, or asked the same question Brooks asked and made the officer explain himself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it. And subscribe for more stories where accountability actually shows up.
We need to ask a few questions and look at your business records right now.
Before anything, identify yourself clearly, name an agency, and tell me if you have a warrant.
It's just preliminary. It'll be quick if you cooperate.
Do you have a warrant or a court order, yes or no?
You're not in a position to refuse.
This is private property that I own.
The lead agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration walked into that Savannah bakery like he already had permission. He acted like the staff were going to fall in line, answer questions on the spot, and hand over records without slowing him down. He did not bring a warrant. He did not present a court order. He brought confidence, a badge, and the assumption that would be enough. That assumption collapsed when Dr. Alana Pierce stepped forward. She was not a frightened employee trying to keep her job. She owned the business and the building. She had built legitimate companies for years, and she understood exactly how government requests were supposed to work. The agent, Trent Callahan, treated the moment like a routine squeeze. Pierce treated it like a legal boundary. Right after this hook, quick question for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you like seeing people hold their ground and force accountability, hit like and subscribe. These situations only go one way when nobody pushes back. Now, here's how it started. It was March 2020, midday, Savannah, Georgia. The bakery was busy in the normal way. Customers waited near the counter. Staff moved between the register and the prep area. The space was open enough that most people could hear what was happening without trying. 2 agents entered together. Callahan led. His partner stayed close, quiet, and watchful. They approached the counter and started pressing for what they described as preliminary questioning and access to business records. The request was framed like a simple step, as if it would be strange to hesitate. Pierce did not argue feelings or speculate about their reasons. She immediately focused on process. She required identification shown clearly, not a quick flash. Names, agency, and purpose needed to be visible. Then she asked the only question that mattered for what they were demanding, whether they had a warrant. When they did not produce one, she told them they were not getting records, and they were not questioning her staff inside her business. Callahan shifted tactics fast. He tried to make refusal sound suspicious. He leaned on authority instead of law. He implied that cooperation would make life easier and resistance would create problems. Pierce stayed calm and consistent. She repeated that the building was private property she owned and that he had no legal right to take records or conduct questioning there without proper authorization. She also told him to leave. That was the moment the room changed. Customers started watching closely. Staff stopped moving as casually as they had been. Phones came out first discreetly and then openly. People were not filming for entertainment. They were filming because they could sense the agent was pushing past what sounded reasonable. Callahan noticed the cameras and did not like it. His posture tightened and his tone sharpened. He stopped trying to sound polite and started applying pressure more directly. He raised the threat level by using the language of obstruction, suggesting that Pierce was committing a crime by refusing to comply. That move was the turning point because it revealed what he was really doing. He was not following a lawful process and hitting a wall. He was trying to convert a lawful refusal into an excuse for control. Pierce did not give him the reaction he wanted. She did not yell. She did not insult him. She did not step aside. She held the same position. Show legal authority or leave. The steadiness made Callahan's escalation look worse, especially in front of witnesses. Then he escalated again. He moved closer in a way meant to intimidate and signal physical enforcement. His partner stayed in place, still quiet, still backing the posture. Staff and customers kept recording. In a packed bakery, everyone could see that the owner was simply asserting her rights in her own building, while a federal agent tried to force compliance without a warrant. Callahan began moving as if an arrest was the next step, even though Pierce had not attacked anyone or interfered with an investigation. She had refused warrantless access and demanded they leave private property. That is when Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker arrived. She did not walk in confused. She assessed quickly and took control. She separated the agents from Pierce and shut down the obstruction threat immediately. She ordered the agents to leave the bakery and made it clear the encounter had crossed a serious line. Callahan attempted to hold on to the situation, but the authority dynamic had changed. Once a supervisor publicly stops an agent mid-escalation, the attempt to force an arrest loses all cover. The agents left under Whitaker's direction. Pierce stayed composed through the exit. She did not chase them out or perform for the cameras. She focused on ending the unlawful pressure and keeping her staff safe. The bakery returned to normal movement, but the moment did not fade. Multiple people had recorded it from different angles, and the business had its own cameras as well. The evidence existed, and it was already spreading beyond the room. Footage from inside that bakery hit the internet the same day. Not because Pierce chased attention, but because there were too many witnesses and too many angles for it to stay private. People posted clips, others reposted them, and soon the story wasn't just agents visited a business. Viewers saw a federal agent pushing for questioning and records without a warrant, then threatening arrest when the owner refused. That detail made it spread faster. Most people don't know the fine points of search law, but they understand a basic line. Show legal authority if you want access to private records. The video made it obvious that the pressure came first and the paperwork came never. Comment sections filled with the same reactions. Some were angry and some were scared, a lot were personal. Business owners talked about agents showing up and acting like consent was mandatory. Former employees of different agencies weighed in about how often "just cooperate" got used as a shortcut around actual procedure. Local Savannah pages picked it up next. Then regional outlets. Then national coverage followed, because the clip was simple to understand and hard to defend. Inside the agency, the tone changed the moment the video started trending. Supervisors did not treat it like a minor misunderstanding. The footage showed the full sequence: the demand, the refusal, the threat, the attempted escalation, and the supervisor intervention. It also showed witnesses recording. That mattered because it eliminated the usual wiggle room where reports get written to make the scene sound cleaner than it looked. Whitaker's decision to pull the agents out immediately became the agency's first problem and its first protection at the same time. Her intervention protected the public and reduced harm in the moment, but it also signaled something else. Leadership recognized this as a serious violation right away. That meant they could not later pretend it was unclear. If a senior supervisor had to stop it in real time, it was already past the boundary. Reporters and activists began looking into Callahan within days. They found what Pierce's community already suspected. The bakery incident wasn't an isolated bad day. Complaints existed. Patterns existed. Prior claims involved aggressive tactics, warrantless or legally questionable searches, and confrontations that targeted Black citizens more often than coincidence could explain away. The public didn't need every document to understand the core contradiction. Callahan stayed in the field because his statistics looked productive: arrests, seizures, cases closed. Leadership had rewarded outcomes while minimizing the cost of how those outcomes were produced. That trade-off became the real story. People started asking how many complaints were needed before someone like Callahan got pulled off the street. One complaint could be noise. Two could be conflict. A long string across years with similar allegations is a warning, yet the warning had been managed instead of addressed. Whitaker's name surfaced too, and the reaction split. Some praised her because she showed up, took control, and stopped it. Others asked why it took a public incident to trigger real action. That question didn't land on her alone. It landed on the full supervisory chain that had kept Callahan moving from one situation to the next. Pierce stayed disciplined during the media storm. She did not present herself as a victim begging for sympathy. She presented herself as a business owner defending a lawful boundary. Her focus stayed on what viewers could see. No warrant, no access, no intimidation allowed on private property. That calm approach did something important. It prevented the story from drifting into personality drama. It forced everyone to talk about policy, training, oversight, and accountability. Pressure mounted fast. Community leaders demanded answers. Business associations asked for clarity on what owners should do when agents appear without paperwork. Civil rights organizations highlighted the broader pattern. Good numbers can hide bad conduct for years if supervisors choose to look away. Within the agency, an internal review started moving with urgency. This was not the slow-motion process people usually expect. Visibility changes everything. The recordings made it difficult to deny. The witness count made it difficult to rewrite. Public attention made it difficult to delay. Callahan's partner became a secondary focus. Viewers saw him standing there while Callahan escalated. He did not take the lead, but he also did not stop it. That difference mattered later when disciplined decisions came down. Meanwhile, Pierce started preparing for what accountability actually looks like when the cameras stop. She gathered her own evidence: security footage, employee statements, business documentation showing ownership and control of the property. She also documented the impact on operations, staff stress, and reputational risk. Smart move. Civil rights cases don't win on vibes. They win on facts, timelines, and clean records. A civil rights attorney entered the picture soon after. This was not a lawyer looking for quick headlines. It was someone who understood federal litigation and knew how juries react to abuse of authority when it is clearly recorded. The strategy wasn't just to argue that Pierce felt mistreated. The strategy was to show a pattern, show intent, and show the agency's tolerance of that pattern. By the end of the first stretch of coverage, the agency faced two problems at the same time. One problem was Callahan's conduct in that bakery. The bigger problem was what the bakery incident revealed about the system around him. The agency moved quickly once it became clear the footage was not going away. Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker wrote the kind of incident summary that leaves no room for creative interpretation. Her report centered on what the public already saw. Two agents demanded access to records and attempted questioning inside a private business without a warrant, then escalated into threats when the owner asserted a basic constitutional boundary. That framing mattered because it forced the internal review to focus on legality and protocol instead of personality. Investigators pulled everything tied to that visit. They reviewed body-worn footage where it existed, camera footage from the bakery, and the phone videos posted online. They interviewed staff and customers. They collected ownership documentation that confirmed Pierce's control of the property. They also looked at what Callahan claimed he was doing there in the first place, because preliminary questioning without a warrant often hides a simple reality: fishing for something that can later be used to justify bigger action. Callahan tried to defend it as standard fieldwork. He pushed the idea that he was pursuing leads and expected cooperation. He framed Pierce as unhelpful. He leaned on the obstruction angle again, arguing that her refusal interfered with his job. That argument didn't hold up under review, because refusing warrantless access is not obstruction. It is the system working as designed. The moment he threatened arrest over that refusal, the situation stopped being a misunderstanding and became an abuse of authority problem. Whitaker's role also got examined, and she passed that test in a way that mattered. She arrived, assessed quickly, took command, removed the agents, and treated it as a serious violation immediately. The agency could not claim ignorance about the problem because a supervisor recognized it on site. Her intervention didn't excuse what happened before she arrived, but it did establish that leadership had a clear chance to stop harm in real time, and did it. Then the review expanded beyond that day. Once the bakery incident made Callahan's name public, complaints that had been sitting in the background became part of the record again. Internal affairs files, prior supervisory notes, and documented concerns from earlier encounters got pulled into the same timeline. The pattern was the same one the public was already talking about: aggressive approaches, questionable searches, repeated conflict with black citizens, and a tendency to treat consent like something he could demand. The most damaging point for the agency was not just that complaints existed. It was that the agency had options earlier and did not use them in a way that protected the public. You can counsel, you can retrain, you can restrict duties, you can pull someone from field operations, you can assign oversight. Someone made choices repeatedly that kept Callahan in situations where his approach produced predictable outcomes. That became the heart of the accountability conversation. Within weeks, Callahan lost his job. The termination was fast by federal standards because the case was clean. Clear conduct, clear video, clear supervisory intervention, and clear public pressure. Leadership could not drag it out quietly without making the agency look like it was protecting him again. Discipline hit the partner too, but it landed differently. He wasn't the one driving the confrontation, yet his presence mattered. He watched it happen and backed the posture without stopping it. Internal discipline reflected that difference in role, but the stain didn't wash off. Over time, he ended up leaving the agency. Pierce didn't treat those personnel moves as the finish line. She understood the basic problem. Termination handles one person. It does not address the system that tolerated the pattern long enough to let him walk into her business and try it again. So she filed a civil rights lawsuit. The complaint focused on unlawful pressure, abuse of authority, and the attempted use of arrest threats as leverage to obtain cooperation without legal process. Her legal team framed the case around constitutional violations and the practical damage caused when federal agents act as if warrants are optional. Discovery turned the case into a spotlight. Pierce's attorneys demanded the internal history connected to Callahan's conduct: prior complaints, internal communications, performance reviews, any documentation showing how leadership evaluated him and why he stayed in the field. The agency fought to limit what had to be produced because patterns are hard to defend once a jury sees them lined up in order. Pierce's side also prepared like professionals. Security footage was organized and preserved. Witnesses were identified early, not just staff, but customers, who recorded and remembered details. Business records were ready to show ownership and private property control. They also documented operational disruption, staff stress, and reputational consequences after the video spread. That matters in court because defendants love to minimize harm and call it a brief interaction. It was not brief for the people inside the bakery. It became a public event with real impact. As the trial date got closer, settlement discussions floated in and out. The agency had incentives to settle quietly. Pierce had incentives to push forward. She wasn't only seeking compensation. She wanted a verdict that said clearly that intimidation without legal authority is not law enforcement. That decision came with risk, because trials always do. Still, the recordings and witnesses shaped the case in a way defendants hate. Video shrinks the space for storytelling. It forces accountability to attach to behavior instead of excuses. By the time the case reached the courtroom calendar, the question wasn't whether the confrontation happened. The question was what the system was going to pay for allowing it to happen the way it did. Trial made everything sharper. In pre-trial motions, the agency's attorneys tried narrowing what the jury would hear. They pushed to limit discussion of prior complaints and tried framing the bakery incident as a tense but isolated event. Pierce's side argued the opposite. The bakery incident only made sense when the jury understood why Callahan felt comfortable escalating without a warrant in a room full of witnesses. The judge allowed key parts of the record in. That shifted the whole case. Once jurors heard there had been earlier complaints with similar themes, the bakery footage stopped looking like a one-off mistake and started looking like the predictable result of tolerated behavior. Pierce testified with the same discipline she showed in the bakery. She laid out the sequence clearly. 2 agents arrived. They demanded immediate questioning and access to business records. No warrant appeared. She required credentials and lawful authority. Callahan escalated into obstruction language and moved toward an arrest, even though she stayed compliant and calm. She explained why she refused. She was protecting her staff and her business from a warrantless phishing attempt in her own building. Witnesses backed her up. Staff described how Callahan's tone shifted and how the threat level rose once Pierce did not give in. Customers confirmed the same thing from the other side of the room. Several videos in the bakery's security footage matched their accounts, and that consistency mattered because jurors don't like guessing. They like proof. Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker also became a key piece of the story. Her arrival and decision to stop the agents in real time carried weight with the jury. It told them someone with authority saw the conduct and treated it as a problem immediately. That undercut any attempt to paint Pierce as difficult or uncooperative in a way that justified escalation. Callahan's defense tried the standard pivot. They argued he was doing his job, following leads, relying on experience, and dealing with someone who would not cooperate. They tried saying the obstruction language was a lawful warning. Pierce's attorneys kept dragging it back to one simple issue: legal process. No warrant, no authority to demand private records on the spot. No lawful basis to turn a refusal into an arrest threat. Then they added the point that hit hardest. Callahan didn't just ask. He pressured. He threatened. He tried to force compliance by manufacturing consequences. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a tactic. Closing arguments focused on punishment, not just repair. Pierce's team asked the jury to treat the case as a message about power. They argued that if an agent could walk into a business, demand records without paperwork, threaten arrest when refused, and face no serious consequences, then constitutional limits become optional in practice. They also pointed out the agency had warning signs long before this bakery and still kept him in the field. The jury came back with a verdict that made it clear they understood exactly what they were deciding. They awarded Dr. Alana Pierce $24.2 million in damages. The size of the award signaled more than compensation. It signaled punishment for abuse of authority and for a system that let the pattern continue until it became impossible to ignore. After the verdict, consequences kept rolling. Callahan was already gone, but the public now saw why he should have been removed earlier. The partner's discipline looked lighter by comparison, yet it still ended the same way over time. He left the agency. Supervisors faced internal heat too, because once a case becomes a national example, leadership cannot pretend the problem was invisible. Pierce did not treat the verdict like a personal trophy. She used it as leverage. Public testimony came first. She spoke about what happened in plain terms and kept her focus on business owners and workers who get pressured because agents expect compliance without paperwork. Then she helped build a legal support effort aimed at protecting other business owners facing unlawful searches and intimidation. It was practical help, not speeches. Guidance on what to ask, what to record, and how to document the encounter without escalating it. Community pressure followed that work. Local business groups pushed for clearer agency policies on contact with businesses. Civil rights groups used the case to argue for earlier intervention when complaint patterns appear. The public conversation shifted from, "This agent acted badly," to, "Why did the system keep putting him in position to act this way?" That's the part that stuck. This story did not end with one supervisor doing the right thing or one jury issuing a big number. The real critique was bigger and uglier. The system failed repeatedly by tolerating a documented pattern because the outcomes looked good on paper. The bakery incident only became the breaking point because it was filmed, witnessed, and impossible to spin. So here's the question people kept asking after the verdict. Why does accountability start after the 17th complaint in a viral video instead of after the first verified pattern? Drop your answer in the comments. What would you have done if federal agents came into your business demanding records without a warrant? Would you have stayed calm like Pierce did, or would the pressure have worked? If you want more real, grounded stories where power gets checked and accountability actually lands, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more.